All right, how's it going? This is Professor Harvey. Just wanted to get something to y'all for this week to get started. The first thing is thank you for pushing through, working, struggling. I know the first two labs are frustrating in that way. What I've done is I've posted essentially the walkthrough for Lab 2, and I'll explain in the text of this announcement what we want to do for the next couple labs. Lab 3 and Lab 4 kind of go together. So basically I have 2 weeks to work on the tech piece for this next set of lab data. So that should give us a chance to get deeper into it and use the lessons in the video that I posted so you can see what the data was for Lab 2 and what was available there and how you can analyze it, how you can understand it. Hopefully that will be very helpful in working Lab 3, and we're going to kind of try to work through those together. So I'll post that information. Thank you for your patience and sort of soldiering through that. I know it's kind of frustrating. It feels like you're kind of left out in the wind there. But what I don't want to do is kind of give you the walkthrough before you get a chance to do it, right? So you get a chance to do it, and then you get the walkthrough, and that's kind of how it is, right? I don't know if any of you guys play any video games, but if you do the walkthrough before you play the game, it's kind of like cheating. So I understand how frustrating it is, and I appreciate your patience. I promise after the next 6 weeks, this all won't feel like such a mystery. It's, the forensics and the kind of stuff we're doing here is so big, and there's so much to it. It's hard to start peeling that onion and figure out where you even start. So this is how we start. So the other thing I want to do is I want to go over briefly the discussion topics from the last 2 weeks, and sort of give you some insights and ideas about them. I've been dealing the past 2 weeks. Got a call on Sunday of Memorial Day weekend, because of course that's when you get these calls, from a client where we had finished an incident and they have a new incident, which is partly a continuation of their old incident, and we're going to talk about that. I really try to incorporate stories where I can from real life stuff. I've been, this is a major client, a major breach, and they're in a real bind, and it's been super busy. In fact, I spent the whole time, the last time I taught through this class, I was dealing with the first incident for this client, and it was very trying to do both at the same time. Hopefully it won't be quite as bad this time, but it made for lots of good stories to share. The first question from the first week's discussions was about the stakeholders in the incident response plan. It asked for 3, but I'm going to give more than 3. The first key stakeholder is generally like the senior management and board of directors of the organization, right? These days, it's well recognized that a major cyber incident is what you call it's a major event for a company. It's in many cases an existential threat for a company, and so the board, the CEO want to be involved. So from the second or third day we were there, this company where I'm dealing with this current incident, right? We were briefing the board, and sometimes the IR people, even outside contractors like what I do, or outside consultants will brief the board. That happens sometimes. Other times we're just giving the talking points and sitting in the room. More often that's a better way to handle it. So that's the key stakeholders. They're the ones who typically are under the gun and need to provide answers. As an organization, there's a lot of other stakeholders. You've got your employees, you've got your customers, you've got your suppliers. Sometimes they're all implicated. You've got data that belongs to all of those people. And if that data is lost, if that data is stolen, if that data gets abused, it affects all of those people potentially. Even your, we usually would think of like staff, customers, but even suppliers, you have their data. Even though they kind of work for you, you're probably not their only customer. So You're probably not their only customer. You're probably not their biggest customer, and yet you may have information that could cause them real trouble if it were to get revealed. IT obviously is a huge customer. The CISO in a large organization is usually the sort of go-between between the IR folks and the board. He's kind of the first level executive leadership that gets involved. Sometimes it's not the CISO, it's the CIO. It depends on how big the organization is. Obviously, there's lots of IT people involved. A big enough organization would have InfoSec and IT as kind of two separate things. And really, that's ideal, right? I mean, InfoSec should not be part of IT. They should have some independence, and the CISO should have some independence, because they need to be a check on what IT does. If the security folks just answer to IT, then when IT is doing stupid things that are risky, and the security guys tell them, hey, you shouldn't be doing that, well, it's hard to tell your boss, hey, you shouldn't be doing that. So it's really better when information security reports to someone else, the CFO, Chief Risk Officer, Chief Operating Officer, or directly the CEO. When the CISO reports to somebody else who can put some real heat on the CIO, you get a lot more accountability there. It's hard to hold someone accountability who's your boss. So another key stakeholder that is often neglected in these levels, one or two people I think mentioned these folks, and that was awesome, is legal. So my line of work, where I'm a consultant, work for a big company that does consulting, that gets brought in to help out with IRs. Most often these days, we get hired technically by a lawyer or a law firm, right? So a company, if you're smart and you get hacked, you have an incident, your first call is not to me as the IR consultant, even though that wouldn't be a bad call. Your better first call is usually to a lawyer, right? Because there's legal implications for all these things, and you want to be on top of that. So the call is to the lawyers, and then the lawyers hire us. And one of the reasons that is done that way is that if the lawyers hire us and they hire the consulting company for the purpose of providing legal advice to the company that got hacked, then all of our findings in our work can be kept under attorney-client privilege. Right? It's almost like when a lawyer hires a private detective as part of a case. That work is part of the attorney's work, and therefore it's privileged. That doesn't always hold up in court in these cases. In fact, there was a big decision just last week where that did not hold up in court. That had to do with, I think it was Capital One, where they had a relationship with my company's biggest competitor. And because of the nature of the relationship, the judge in the case said, no, I mean, sure, I mean, nominally they're working for the lawyer, but really they're working for Capital One. And they threw out privilege, and the consultant's report had to be disclosed as part of the case in discovery, which was a real eye-opener for people in our business as to how we're going to keep those things under wraps. It's not necessarily that you're trying to keep it secret, but you're trying to avoid you're trying to make it easier for you to be honest with the client. If stuff is put in a report in writing and it gets found on discovery, then if you're the client company that got hacked and somebody's suing you, whether it be your customers, your employees, someone is suing you because of something about the incident, if there's a consultant's report that's available and they can get that in discovery, they can use the information in that against the client that got hacked. And now they're just in more trouble. And it makes it hard to be honest with them. It tends to make people nervous about putting things on paper. And that sometimes is a solution. Sometimes the lawyers say, we're not sure it'll be covered under privilege, so just don't write anything down. And that's not good. So privilege is not a bad thing. And that's the way business gets done. The lawyers run the show on IR when it's done right. The next question was using fire alarms and building evacuation plans as an analogy for an IR plan, and as saying, hey, you exercise fire alarm plans, right? You have fire drills. Even if you work in a commercial office building, the landlord will run fire drills. We have them in our building. Is there any value in exercising a cyber incident response plan? Absolutely there is. In fact, if you have a plan that you've never done some kind of test or exercise with, it's probably not a very good plan, because when you actually do try to implement it, you'll find, oh wait, it doesn't say what to do at this point, or it doesn't say what to do at this point. It doesn't say how to handle this kind of thing. One of the services that my company offers, in addition to actually helping with real incidents, is staging pretend incidents. Usually they're not like faked on people. I mean, like, everybody knows it's an exercise, and a lot of times it's a sitting around talking exercise where we have a PowerPoint slideshow we go through, and we kind of walk through a fictional exercise or a fictional incident and use their plan so they can see where it works, where it doesn't work, what it covers, and what maybe it leaves out, so they can improve their plan and do a better job when it comes to a real thing. So yeah, absolutely, exercises are important. If you have a plan that you've never tested and never exercised, probably not a very good plan. There's a question about cyber incident response planning. It says the incident response plan contains several sections. One of our readings went through what those sections were, and the question was, are these organizationally dependent, or should they all be addressed regardless of the organization? There was some difference of opinion among people, which is good. It's good to see that kind of discussion. I would say the reality is a little bit of both. Most of those sections probably should be addressed in most organizations. There may be some organizations that are very small or very specialized that don't need all of those, but the majority of them really should be addressed in any plan. But obviously the importance of some of them is much, much greater for some organizations than for others. And I would say more so that there's things that need to be added into those sections. For a lot of organizations, they need to make sure that they address the distinctive things that that organization has and does that wouldn't be covered in a generic template of a plan. The next question was sort of an interesting one about investigations. It talks about indicators versus precursors. So an indicator being something that you see and is an indicator of trouble when it happens, whereas a precursor is something that indicates trouble sort of over the horizon, right? Like the old saying about red sky in the morning, the sailor should take warning, right? So you get up in the morning, you see the sky is red, and you say, oh man, there's a storm coming. The storm's not here yet, but there's a storm coming. So the idea here about precursors is they're like that, right? They're a sign that, hey, maybe someone is poking around, right? We call this reconnaissance. Someone is poking around our perimeter. They haven't hacked us yet, but maybe they're trying to, or maybe they're thinking about that. And sometimes you have these kind of precursors. So the question is, which one's more important? I would say realistically what's more important usually is indicators. And that's just because usually you don't have a lot of precursors. If you can set up your system such that you have good precursors, that you have good detection of reconnaissance, of scanning, and that sort of thing, that's great. The problem is, even if you have that, it usually doesn't allow you to prevent an incident. It might allow you to look more closely and be aware that someone's trying to get in. I mean, think about it. If you had signs that someone was poking around outside your house last night, that's not necessarily going to enable you to prevent that person from poking around and maybe kicking in the door the next night. It might prompt you to say, oh, we need to get a camera on the door, but you might not have time to get that in there in advance. And even if you have a camera at the door, it doesn't not necessarily going to prevent them from kicking in the door. You'll just have a recording of them when they do. So precursors can help you pay closer attention, to help you to activate some increased logging, to pay more attention to your logging, to maybe see if there's a vulnerability around what the attacker is trying to do. Kind of reminds me of the original movie Star Wars. I think it's actually Episode 4, right? A New Hope. Right when the rebels are attacking the Death Star, the one guy says, "Hey, we've analyzed their attack pattern, and there actually is a weakness that they're trying to attack." And so they've analyzed the attack pattern. They said, these guys are trying to, they haven't successfully yet, but they're trying to attack a weakness. And we've figured out what the weakness is based on looking at their attack pattern. We figured out what the weakness is they're trying to exploit. Sometimes you can see that in logs and these kind of precursors. So realistically, indicators are more important because in most cases you have few, if any, precursors. If you can find a way to have them, and if in any given case you have precursors, that's golden. And it's better to have them. So, but the question was not which one's better to have. The question is which one's more important. And I would say indicators are more important just because 90% of everything we're looking at is much more indicators than precursors. And usually even when there were precursors, nobody noticed them until too late. And then they're basically just more indicators. The last one was about system logs. It says discuss 3 types of logs you would deem important post-incident. The method and the content collected, and any anomalies you would deem a challenge in event correlation. So it says anomalies such as time that you would deem a challenge in event correlation. This is often a problem. One is sometimes we get logs from a client and they can't even figure out what time zone the logs are in. Please, 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 if you're involved in the IT business in any way, please set up your logs so that everything is logged in UTC, otherwise known as Greenwich Mean Time. Technically, we call it UTC. I live in the Eastern Time Zone. Right now, that's 4 hours ahead of us. In the winter, when we're on real time instead of daylight savings time, it's 5 hours ahead of us. UTC. It's not London time, because London has daylight savings time too, but UTC doesn't have daylight savings time. It's always the same. It never changes. And you should have all your stuff on UTC, even if you're thinking, well, all of our stuff's in one geography, so it doesn't really matter. No, because a lot of things by default log in UTC. So if you have logging enabled for anything, make sure it's in UTC. That's a giant, colossal pain when you can't even figure out what time zone something's in. Make sure everything's in UTC. And then also sometimes you have clock drift, right? Some systems, the clock is fast, the clock is slow. The clock on my laptop right now is like 4 minutes slow, and it drives me crazy. And it's managed by my employer's central system. And for some reason, my laptop, my colleagues tell me they don't have this problem, but mine is syncing with our corporate system. For whatever reason, mine is slow, and I don't know why, but I don't have any control over it, and it's annoying. But if you have servers, firewalls, proxies that are drifting in time, you have a problem. So those are all types of logs. I would say big categories of logs. I would say host logs. On normal system logs on every kind of system are one key important kind of log. Another kind we deal with a lot is web logs, which would be the most common type of a larger category. I would say is application logs. So any kind of client-server application, web-based application is going to generate application logs or web logs, and those are super important. We deal with those a lot. Then I would say logs from any kind of security devices come into play a lot. Firewall logs, proxy logs, antivirus logs, intrusion detection system logs, obviously mail, there's all kinds of mail security devices. I mean, you name it, anything that has any kind of security function hopefully keeps good logs. What you want to be doing with these logs is you want to be collecting them all together in one place. You don't want to keep them on the device. You want to collect them all together in one place so that they're all, and you want to make sure you know how much you want to keep. And a lot of organizations have standards that say we need to keep at least 90 days worth of logs or whatever it is. It depends on what your industry is and what different regulatory requirements you may fall under. But you want to have that be a conscious choice is the key thing, because companies tell us, well, what should we do? I say, if you don't have any other standard, start with 90 days. 180 days, if you can afford the storage, is better. But make it a conscious decision. Don't just say, well, we have however much logs is kept by default. That's means you're just not paying attention or making a decision. But you want it to be a conscious decision that you decided we keep this much in the way of logs. So those are all key things with logs. You want to pull them off the system. And the reason you want to pull them off the system is so that A, it's easier to find them and get them and at them and analyze them when the time comes. And B, so that if somebody breaks into a system, they can't just manipulate the logs. The logs are being streamed in real time, hopefully, to some kind of log repository, and that log repository should not allow those records to be overwritten, right? The logs can be written, but they can't be modified once they're written, and that would not allow them to be deleted outside of the normal time frame, right? So you should have good security around those logs. It should be write only without allowing modification or deletion. So those are the questions we've had. I'm at 20 minutes, which is what my goal was for the video. So I guess I'll have to put the rest of my instructions in the in the text for this announcement. But I'll do that, and hopefully I'll see you and talk to you all soon. Thank you.